How's how is everything in the Bangalore?
Oh God, eh? Last night I was on my way home and I've told you about those five stray dogs that I keep an eye on, which just live on the street.
Right?
So
Stop
these
feeding them,
idiots,
Deepak.
oh come
Stop
on, Sean.
feeding them. I guarantee you, you're feeding them.
I know I am. I'm aware of this.
Wow.
They followed me to like the street adjacent to mine, and some
Right?
kids were fucking throwing stones at them.
Oh man,
Oh God, it was
that
a
sucks.
nightmare to control all of them and bring them back here. And those kids are just acting like a bunch of fucking uneducated douchebags. Ugh.
Like kids. Like
Mm-hmm.
here's the expectation when I was a kid. We used to have this term and it was called boys will be boys. And I know it's an incorrect term anymore, but guess
Mm-hmm.
what? Guess what? Boys will be boys. They're just assholes. They
I think
really
you should.
are.
I think you should just update that to dicks will be dicks.
Well, you don't usually see that kind of behavior out of girls. You
Mm-hmm.
just don't. And this is from a person who's raised five kids. And I was from a very big family. The boys were just a handful. Jesus. And we kind of had more of an acceptance for that's the way it is. And you go, if genetically they've been that way for 2 million years, do you really, or, I know it's not really 2 million, but let's say a few 100,000, do you really think you're going to change it because you changed the term? I mean, honestly,
I know.
yeah. You know why 18-year-olds go to war, don't you? They don't question anything. They just go kill whatever's in front of them.
Follow orders.
Yep, that's right. Good or bad. What's up with you?
Not much. Just working on a new application.
Yeah.
Don't worry,
And
it's
what,
not Struber. Struber will never be approved, Sean.
dude, I think that's hilarious. I think that's funny as heck.
I'll
Well,
tell you
we
another
don't,
funny one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm listening. Struber.
Another funny one we got was called vacation dogs for people who don't
Right.
actually want a pet, but when they're on holiday, they
That
can
is,
take one.
wow. That is not a bad idea. You know, they, so if you look at the expenditures of Americans on pets, it's just
Mm-hmm.
off the chart. And I'll guarantee you, my dog costs me as much as one of my kids. The only thing I don't have to do is educate the dog. So other than that,
Mm.
it's pretty okay. Wow. Well, that leads us into the imposter syndrome deal. This will be
Yeah,
an interesting chat. I literally, when I saw that note, I'm like, I had to look it up for one to make sure I was correct on what I thought it was. So I
I write you the most shittiest bylines ever. I'm like, I hope he
well,
understands what the hell I said.
no, here's the interesting part of all that. I'm 60 years old,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't feel that way anywhere anymore. And for people that are tuning in, imposter syndrome is like you go into a room and you never feel like you measure up, so you cover it. We call it the arrogance of a white teen. Because Caucasian teenage boys seem to know that they have the lack of actual belonging. Like they don't have the resume to belong. And I don't mean this in a mean way, but
Mm-hmm.
they have the ability and the bravado to look like they belong. And that's what's actually more important.
Oh yeah.
Does that make sense? Because I had this kid and he was probably in his early 20s. Um, and I hope you and I didn't cover this already. And he goes, "Well, you seem very sure of yourself." And I go, yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
fucking 60. Of course I'm sure of myself. I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at. That's the difference. I do know what I'm not good at. And guess what? I hire
Mm-hmm.
people for that shit. Yeah, I hire
Yeah.
people. And so I think you and I are usually pretty politically astute. We can stand in the corner of a room and figure out kind of who's the person, you know,
So
that sort of deal.
the one thing that I'll tell you about that is at times,
Yeah,
sometimes I still have that feeling when I get into a room and I'm like, oh shit, they're
yeah.
waiting for me to speak. And in
Right.
my head, I always remember this one thing that I can't remember who told me this, but they told me that to a casual observer, confidence and faking confidence looks the same.
Same thing. It's the same thing. And you know, your accent carries you a lot of places that it would not carry the average person. I was, when I was younger, so, you know, when I was a teenager, I worked in restaurants. So I had to get along with whoever the customers were. And if I would listen to them and hear what they found important, their views on things. Now, I eventually realized they don't always know what they're talking about. And sometimes they've got the imposter syndrome and they're just trying to show off. And that took me a while. You know, you got to get screwed over a couple of times before you figure that out. But I understood the vocabulary of that subset of humans in that age and wealth range. And I figured out a way to be calm around them. But so I have always been an argumentative person. I think that's fair to say, argumentative rather than, because I'm not always aggressive, but I do push points. And I've done this with my mom and everybody else. And I'm at a dinner when I'm about 16 years old. And we had these huge tobacco lawsuits here in America. And, you know, for decades, where the tobacco industry was trying to prove they weren't drug dealers. And everyone else was going, yes, you are. Yes, you are.
That was Johnny as well.
So, yeah, and then they've shipped their business over to you guys, so you'll be doing it next. So I'm at this dinner, and this old guy who doesn't care for me very much because I date his granddaughter says something just fucking crazy, and I go, "That is not true," and the whole place went dead silent. And the ladies at the table were shockingly uncomfortable. I was not in the least bit because I knew the guy was full of shit. And so he turns to me and he goes, "Which part is untrue?" And I go, "We're not in a courtroom. We're just at dinner. Everything you just said was full of shit." And I was not trying to be disrespectful, but I thought it was demeaning that he was pulling this stuff over on everybody's face. And I couldn't tell whether he was doing it to see who would take it. You know what I mean? You're testing the orange by squeezing it and see what juice comes out. Or if there's somebody at the table that will go, whoa, hold on. And so you kind of take a risk doing that. But I tell you, for the rest of the girl I dated, every time I would see him the rest of my life, he would bring that up. Because he goes, I was never able to do that. You know, I just was never able to do that. You're the only person I've ever seen do it and really just not care. And I go, well, I think I wasn't smart enough to care. Because I had no idea how powerful the guy was. I knew he had money and shit, but, you know, I had no idea. So if let me segue to something before we go back while I'm remembering it. So he would, the same guy that I said that to would invite me to their country club for Sunday brunch. Have I told you this before? And I would talk to the help because I'd worked with most of them. And so as I'm going through my line, getting my Sunday brunch, hey, what's going on? How's everything? And all that. He was appalled that I would talk to the help.
Can I tell you that's something I have similar with you, where a lot of times when we go into a place, I would know, as good as I know about how my friend is doing, I would know how that bartender, how the wait staff are doing, because I would know them, their families, their kids.
Right. Yeah. It's called being polite. That's what we used to call that, being polite, giving a shit. The funny thing is, in that guy's world, it is so important that the waiter know you in front of his friends to look like a big shot, but it's not okay for you to know the waiter.
Yeah, that's
or the
weird,
bartender, or think about that equation, and you go, so you're good enough that we need to know you, but we're not good enough for you to even bother knowing us. And if you saw us anywhere, would we even get a nod? And as an owner, of course I would, but would anybody else? Because those are the customers that I really don't have much favor for when they'll be really lousy to people. And then when they find out I'm the owner, they want to be my friend. I love the person who once came up to the bar and asked me if I knew who their horrible busboy was, and I looked around and I saw it was you. I was like, you fucking idiot, that's the owner. I do happen to know him. I do. That has happened more than once, I'm afraid to say. But so tell me at your age, you're half my age. Tell me at your
Mhm.
age. So England's a bit of a different ball game because most everybody is shockingly pasty white. Now, London itself is pretty
Mhm.
mixed, but not the rest of the country.
No,
So did you have that syndrome walking into places being brown?
I I still get that at times, whether it's the UK or even America for that instance. There
Right.
are times where I walk in and I'm like, oh shit, I was born in India. I shouldn't be able to
Yeah.
be addressing this entire room of millionaires
Yeah.
and billionaires who I'm trying to tell them, we'll take care of your pension fund, things like
Right.
that. It still made me nervous. And there was a point,
Right.
but it was more, I think, where that the moment before you go on stage, where a switch
Yeah.
comes on, like whoever
Yeah.
that was who was talking to them in that room making that presentation, that's not who
Right.
I am in my normal life, if you talk to
No.
me.
Right.
But in that
Well,
room, I am that persona.
and that's a valid transition. So
Mhm.
am I playing a role to sell something or give a presentation? Because if I go in as myself and give a presentation, I'm going to drop some F bombs. I'm going to tell you a couple of funny stories. I can't do that in a professional setting,
Mm-hmm.
and anyone that follows me on social media will see me in t-shirts and suits. There's very
Yeah.
little in between unless I'm doing city council or government work. And then it's generally you got to wear like the shirt of the city. So, it's got
Mm-hmm.
my logo and everything on. Then I look like a cop. So I don't, but as you grow older, think about when you first came to America, because I knew your boss at the time. And he was a
Mm-hmm.
bit of a showman.
Yeah.
And I
Larger
still
than life.
remember, yeah, and I still remember you correcting him, which I thought was classic. Literally correcting him and going, you cannot behave like that. You can't. And you were right on all of it. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't think he picked up on the subtle nuance because in the world he ran in, it only mattered whether the guy had money or not, or access to
Mm-hmm.
money. Not even his own money, but access.
Oh
So
yeah.
I always thought that was pretty fascinating.
Oh, it was amazing at times because those meetings would be with like pension fund managers who had
Mm-hmm.
access to like normal working class Americans' money. And
Right.
there was, in that moment at those tables, there was a lot of that where I just felt like this was just a character I was playing rather than my actual life. And
Yeah.
once they'd leave, I would switch off and just go back to my normal self and just talk to the waitress, talk to the bartender, things like that. But
Right.
in that moment, we had to decide how these funds were going to be allocated, who makes the
Right.
margins. And it's
Yeah.
nothing that we had ever worked for. It was just management of somebody else's hard earned money, was
Right.
what I used to think of it.
Right. But if you think about so I went to high school with the second biggest family in Kuwait.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Obscene amounts of wealth, literally obscene. Not like the Saudis, but pretty dang close. And I always say now as an adult, they would have trusted me with their fortune more than they would have trusted somebody from J.P. Morgan because they
Yeah.
actually knew me. And
Mm-hmm.
so, not because I was any smarter, but if I made a mistake, it'd be an honest mistake. They would always question whether the other person was doing it to graft or retrade. You dump a stock, pick it up, dump a stock, pick it up to get
Yeah.
your percentage on it. And so I don't know why my weird version of blatant honesty comes in handy sometimes, but other
Mm-hmm.
times not. Other times not so much. So you think about when you're sitting in money tables like that, and people
Mm-hmm.
are waiting for you to talk, and you go, well, I mean, I'm waiting for you guys to talk. Who starts first? You know what I mean? Culturally,
Mm-hmm.
do you do your homework before that? So I'm at a Mexican wedding, and
Yeah.
the lady there ran one of my restaurants. It was her kid getting married, and um,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody gets served their food, but nobody's eating. And people keep looking at myself and my business partner, going, "Hey, hey," and I'm like, "Hey, what?" And they go, "You have to eat." And I go, "No, never, never. I'm a guest." I was waiting for the people putting on the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone in the damn room, all 400 of them, were waiting for myself and my partner. And I was never so uncomfortable as to take the first bite of food which is against everything culturally I grew up in. Everything.
I know.
I mean, like I could see my mom shaming me from wherever her soul is at this point, going, "Are you kidding me? What makes you think you're so special?" But culturally, that was the way theirs worked. Here, I got to change my bread here.
Mm-hmm.
But culturally, that's the way theirs worked, and so I don't know. You get a kid that's had a pretty closed environment, and just doesn't know how other people's lives work. How do they adjust to that? You've done the multiple country thing. You've got a bigger grasp. Still doesn't mean you're right all the time, and it does by no means mean I'm right all the time. And so, is there something that you can read from that tells you how that works? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I know what you're saying. See, that cultural thing that I notice is what you mentioned about the Mexican family is pretty similar to India as well. So if you have a guest,
really,
they will wait till you take the first bite.
Oh dear Lord, your mom would kill me.
And this would be like all of us just dying out of polite hunger, where you go first, go first. That same shit that happens with both of us in doorways.
Right. Well, okay, I'll give you another example. So you and I are at the country club here for a benefit. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember how loud the room was.
The people and chewing the salad.
Right. And from salad and forks and knives, where we would have been stared down in London, stared down. Literally, the people would turn around like, "Why are you here?" Now, you and I both knew not to do that. Mm-hmm. But how many of us in that room count? I mean, just as a guesstimate, 10, 15 knew?
15 tops. But the sole reason it was just me and you looking at each other, even at the rest of our table, going like, "Sorry, do they think the salad's going to get up and run away? What are they poking at?"
I've seen people eat without utensils better than that. And it's not a cut down to anybody that was at the benefit. I'm glad they were there. But so you and I were the weird ones in the room.
Yep.
And smart enough, neither one of us said anything to anybody. Just kind of go along, and then you walk out and go, "What the hell was that?" But I always go back to my son eating pizza in London, and you're forced to eat it with a fork and knife. And it's terrible if it's crispy crust pizza because you can't cut through it.
And he was gruesome to watch.
Right, but he's stuck with it. And my cousin was there with us. He's an engineer in London, and he kept watching Kyle to see if he'd lose his patience. And it was quiet in a pizza place. Everybody ate with forks. And look, he knows how to do that for the rest of his life. Mm-hmm. He knows what's acceptable just because we were in that environment. Now, I did not grow up that way. Now, we had a bunch of foreigners in our house all the time, so I understood their cultures a little better. But, we didn't dine out or anything. There were too many of us. So I don't, when I got older, I'll tell you one more story because I don't want to feel like I'm taking all the airtime. When I was maybe 19 years old, I went to a party with who would eventually be my first wife. And it was her school's party. And I was at a competitive other school, which means the boys there, if 4 of them got me in a room and I was by myself, even though they were the wealthiest families in my hometown, they'd still probably try to assault you. That kind of weird competitive bullshit. And so I tell her before we go in, I go, "Don't leave me here. I don't know anybody." And I remember being nervous walking into it. So when I was reading that deal yesterday, I'm like, okay, that is a time in my life where it isn't that I didn't feel like I fit, even though I knew these weren't my folks. I didn't know how to be okay there. Because I really just didn't. I didn't know any of them. I didn't know background, know anything other than really highly competitive sports. And both schools were crazy competitive. And all of a sudden, I don't see her for about 20 minutes. And I'm like, okay, well, God, I guess I'm just going to go. And I left.
Oh, wow.
And, right. She calls me the next day. She's like, "What happened?" I said, "Man, you remember I said, don't leave me in there." I didn't. Right. And I didn't think of any of this until I read that deal yesterday. And I was like, yeah, I've done that and been so uncomfortable. I was willing to leave rather than, because I didn't know to go introduce myself around. and probably at that point, pick not the prettiest girl in the room, so it doesn't look like you're hitting on somebody. Just go up and start making some jokes and have fun. I didn't know how to do that.
Oh wow, I would have never imagined that, eh?
Yeah,
I
isn't
think
that crazy? And I literally left.
I've done stuff like that, eh?
Right, but most people never. I mean, I don't remember in my entire life ever talking to anybody about this except her the next day. And she was like, well, oh God, that's my fault. And I go, no, I'm not mad. I just can't stay in an environment where I'm that uncomfortable. I just
like you can feel not the tensions as such, but the
how about the word ire? You can feel the ire of the boys in the room, and I'm like, hey, these fucking guys are gonna jump my ass. And these are not. I mean, when I talk real wealth, I mean airplane wealth. They're no better than any other teenage boys. Boys will be boys. Yeah. Back to that stupid ass saying again. But yeah, so that's what I was. I'll give you another one. So I get asked out by this girl, which back in my day was unheard of. I mean, in your early 20s, it just didn't happen. But damn, she was good looking. And so I go to pick her up, and it's it's Sunday afternoon. It was her day off. That's all she could do. So I'd already been to church and all this other stuff. And it wasn't like I was a good Christian or Catholic boy or anything. I go to her house, and I'm fairly well dressed up. And I think we're going to have what was then called lunch. Brunch didn't exist back then. And
oh, God damn
and
it,
she opens. I know, right? Isn't that crazy? I get some pre-computer stories that are great. So she opens the door and she has a beer in her hand, like a cheap canned beer. And she's in a dress. And I was like, oh, and she goes, what? And I go, God, it's like 11 a.m. You got a beer going. She goes, oh God, don't tell me you're one of those goddamn people. And I really was. I was judging her from the start because in my life, I hadn't seen people drink at 11 a.m. unless they were terribly alcoholic. and now it's pretty normal that people do it every Sunday. But back then, right? And she goes, well, do you want a beer? And I'm like, God, no, it's 11 a.m. And I've been out drinking until 3:30, so I don't get to be judgmental. I just was different time frame. But I remember.
I like the high horse that I show up on at times, even though I know I went home at like 3:30 in the morning. But if I see someone at 9 in the morning and they just drink the first beer, I'm like, you piece of shit.
Right, exactly. What's going to happen to your dad? But you know what that is? That's your dad talking in the back of your head, my dad talking in the back of my head going, hey, you got to get some work done. All that stuff's for later. And that's just that straight back to the immigrant work ethic deal. But so even there, when I went out with her the whole day, I knew I did not belong in her world. Whatever that world was, goddamn, she was beautiful. She was nice. She was funny. I couldn't get beyond the, canned open beer, cheap canned open beer at 11 a.m.
Did you, full of judgment as soon as she opened the door, did you go like, what up, boozy? Who drinks this early?
Are we going to the 11:30 a.m. AA meeting? You getting a head start? I truthfully, so what's funny for people to understand is my mom's family had money. That's where this shit came from. And my dad, they were farmers. I mean, so would he have cared? Probably not. But would he have had a beer? No, he'd get his work done first. But I, for some reason, had that whatever I'd learned from my mom's side of the family. Oh, Lordy, Lordy, Lordy. Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
What I noticed is that you'd probably notice this as well, probably because of your father and your upbringing. In different countries, I have different attitudes towards different things, depending on what I'm doing.
God, yeah.
Oh, yes. Like what I hate, like the weirdest part about having James here was James was used to me in Oklahoma. And all of a sudden, he saw part of me that was what I am in Bangalore. And then my friends saw how I am with him. And they were like, why does it seem like you're having some sort of colossal personality schizophrenic moment? And I was like, it's because y'all are not supposed to mix. And I don't mean the races. I just meant the friends groups.
So that makes pretty solid sense. You know, I went to 5 different high schools, and so when I would see people from the other schools and I'm with my friends, different subset of behaviors, you know, because we all adjust however we need to do to get along wherever we're at. But you know, when you're in Bangalore, you're all business DPAC, ABD, all business DPAC. And over here, we of course know 2 different sides of you over here. Yeah, isn't that crazy?
I know.
But
And
that
the
makes
weird part
sense.
is like, I think it's because even most of my adult working life, I've been around you guys and not around the
Right.
kids who knew me from here. So
Yeah.
that's also a weird point when I meet them and they want to go out
Yeah.
at like, they want to leave the house at 10 at night and come back
Dear
home at like
Lord.
3, 4 in the morning. And I'm
Yeah.
like, dude, I don't do that anymore. I
Yeah.
mean, I can see you for an hour
I'm
or
too
so.
old for that shit. Right. Right. I'll be the designated driver, but you got to Uber home. I'll get you there. So I'll give you one more great imposter story. So when I was 21, I opened my first company, and I know I've said this 10 times on here, but the only reason that matters is for the rest of my life, people looked at me as an entrepreneur. I was just an idiot that didn't know the risks I was taking and took them anyway, and it worked out okay. So I never felt special for that until I raised my boys to be 21 years old and looked at both of them and were like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Seriously? You have done nothing with your life so this morning. And the same first wife that did the party thing with me was the one who said, hey, quit shaming your kids for being normal. They're just normal. And I go, what are you talking about? And she goes, look, I married you because you weren't normal, but you have normal kids. That's just what they are. And I was like, didn't know whether to be disappointed, but she was right, where you just go, yeah, I'm gonna let them do their thing. And I very rarely ever get involved in any of it since then. But
Sean,
you know,
when she said that, you should have done the tighten up your coat and go like, I thought you liked me for other reasons. Like you were totally taken advantage of.
Oh yeah. Oh God, yeah. Oh God, yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting to, you know, because I'm literally double your age, and you look back on that, and what is important at 60 and what is important at your age. At your age, I was still building and amassing stuff. And then 15 years after that, I was trying to get rid of most of that stuff because it weighed me down. And if I tell you that, you go, yeah, I haven't been there yet. I still want to do that. And I go, oh, it's such a waste. And you go, yeah, hey, waiter, bring me another Perrier, please. And can somebody shut this guy up? Because nobody wants to hear that, you know?
Can I tell you, I actually am on the same page as you for the sole reason that the problem is that every now and then packing up the house and moving is kind of stressful for me, because I've had like those reminders like 3 times in 3 countries where I was reminded that, hey, you didn't need to buy all this crap, by the way.
Yeah.
Where I just gave away.
You were essentially a traveler. I believe I have a box of mine in my box of yours in my garage. Only I could figure out
a couple of suitcases with Alex and something with
that is a valid point, though. It's so that the trapping. So you look at most American homes. The goal is to move to the suburban area where your home is 3,000 square feet and there's 2 or 3 of you. And what that gives you is enough space to not have to deal with the person you have a little bit of animosity with and act like you get along. When I grew up, we had a big house, but there were 10 or 11 of us living there. There was nowhere. Dude, if I was in the bathroom, somebody was knocking on the damn door. I mean, there was no privacy. There was no anything. And so I don't know where that comfort level is of I need double the space so I can store more shit. And then yet the garage is still full, and it's not full of cars. It's full of boxes. The really expensive cars are still outside of the garage in the tornado. I mean, it just, the comedian, what the hell was the angry comedian's name? He used to do a whole series on this. You get a bigger box to put more shit in it.
Money to buy shit we don't need to impress people we don't like.
Exactly. Isn't that not the world's best quote? Because at the end of it, the people that you think would care. So I had this 56 Mercedes when I was in my early 20s, and it was beautiful, beautiful car. It'd been restored and everything. And I would drive it around, and people loved to look at the car. And I was annoyed with the car because the tires had inner tubes. And if you took a turn too quick, they would pop. And then I'm stuck with an old car that nobody knows how to fix in the middle of nowhere. You don't even want them to tow it because you're afraid they're going to break something. And it turned out to be the dumbest damn thing I'd ever owned. But for about a week, I was impressed with it. And then I had buyer's remorse from there.
That's like the thing Alex always makes fun of me about, where he's like, point to a depreciating asset and Park would love it for the first 10 minutes.
Right, exactly. Right. The point of diminishing returns, is coming shortly. Yeah, I really like that. I like that one. Right. I guess the luck that I have is that I got all that out of my system very, very, very early. And I would say that I am very fortunate for that, but my wife would probably love to have really nice jewelry, and I refuse to buy it. Kathy, unfortunately, whether we want to honestly admit it or not, got stuck with the very, very young, not young, but, I was in my 30s when we were dating, or mid 30s, but I'd already had the maturity of like a 60-year-old where I was like, yeah, none of that's important. I want to do this, this, and this. And to be totally honest with you, I'm not sure I considered her that much in those decisions. I just refused to go down that road again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I just refused. I'm like, no, I'm not living like that. I'm not chasing that shit. Yeah. And so
I remember in my 20s getting like peer pressured into buying shit that I didn't really need at that particular time.
Yeah.
And there was a moment where I remember that line from Frasier where he looks at his brother Niles and he's like, is there anything holding you up beside the starch in that damn shirt?
Oh my God, what a fantastic quote. Wow. So I got a cousin of mine in Ireland named Paul Lawless. And so Paul has been on an international TV show where you go like share lives with somebody else. And he went to France and ran this guy's farm, orchard, and all this other stuff. And the guy was a winemaker and shit. And this guy went to Ireland and lived on our family's, well, not my side of the family, the other side's 500-year-old house on the farm. And it was just a great show. But he owns a gluten-free bakery. A lot of Irish people have celiac disease. So he's done really well. This French guy did really well. And he could not adjust to living in France and the French lifestyle, which is more my style. I mean, truthfully, at this age. And the other guy kind of enjoyed the simplicity of that Irish, used to be a dairy farm and now it's a bakery. So the guy just goes in and you got 20 people working, on your farm. What used to be a milking shed is an enormous bakery. So I don't know, that would be, I'm going to see if I can find a copy of that show and send it to you. That would be the ultimate imposter syndrome. That whole show was, so like if you and I switched places, you would stand out here being brown, doing what I do, and I would stand out over there being white, not having a damn clue how to do anything that you do.
Can you imagine how much trouble both of us would be in? I could,
it would, but it would be a hilarious show.
I know.
It would be yeah. But to do it properly, we would have to be able to, you'd have to tone down your skin and I would have to tone mine up. But it'd be really interesting to see from a perspective, because Indians are so polite and I'm so blunt. I might get killed over there. I am not sure how that would roll. And you're so polite and I'm so blunt over here. People would be like, so what did he really mean? I don't even know what that guy just said.
Hey, that's why I used to have you as my translator. If I said something at a table, you would be like, I think who was that I was talking to? Do you remember that?
Oh my God, it was James with you. Yeah, when you didn't know James very well and you asked me to go to the breakfast and he kept rambling and I was like, yeah, he's just saying no, James. And he goes, what? And I go, he said, no, it's a waste of money. And everybody was totally fine with it. And you'd been going for about 5 minutes.
I was trying to do the mixture of a polite British and Indian person trying to explain to you that your idea was dumb.
Right. Well, and then that it had been done. What you kept saying is, this isn't the first time that's been done. And I still remember that what you said, and I'm like, first, it sounds like it's the 100th. And you were like, well, yes. And I go, well, then there's no reason to do it. But it's weird. He was able to accept that way of statements from me.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, okay, well, then let's move on to the next thing. Let's not waste our time on that. And so those are cultural deals. I don't know if any of those go into the imposter thing. The imposter thing is more about how you feel inside when you walk into a room. I have walked into some rooms, if the people in there, so if I walk into a room full of Hispanics, what I do is find the person that looks like they're having the most fun and go over and start making jokes with them. And then we are laughing so loud, everyone else moves towards us. That's how I play that. And if I'm in a room with African Americans, they're a little bit louder than regular white people. Well, I'm a little louder than regular white people. So I just find somebody that I somewhat recognize from somewhere and go hang out with them. And next thing you know, we're loud laughing and the same thing works out. Asian males I get along with really well. Asian females kind of still give me the white dog look. And then when they realize I'm not hitting on them or trying to do anything, then we're good. But that takes they're a little more apprehensive. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? And most Middle Easterners, I talk food with most everybody. That's my end. Shit,
I think in most of the fundraiser things that I used to come with and the political things I used to go to with you, I would usually try to avoid the brown person for the sole reason that otherwise Indians basically have that thing of just hanging out with their kind and won't talk to anybody else. Yeah,
it's
so
straight out of Animal House.
So I would purposely go and talk to someone who doesn't look like me at all.
Well, and there's no other way to get business done. You sooner or later have to go out of your comfort zone. I have to go out of my comfort zone. So I am selling my infusion book to dispensaries now, which I've never done. So each day I make 4 to 5 calls to different dispensaries. And I've got a little setup like an easel that the book sits on, and then the books are underneath it so people can see what it is. And that is the client base. And I've just never had time to do this. So every single place gave me really, really good feedback. And I've got like 4 placements today. It's going incredibly well for the amount of work I've put into it. But I had one guy that was just I just rubbed him the wrong way, the way I walked into his place or, something like that. And I don't give a shit. I mean, you just move on. There's 1,000 dispensaries for me to hit in the state. I'll be fine.
I met exactly someone like that yesterday. It was this person who I was at a meeting. I was pitching for building out a application. Do you know, she just sat there, Googled everything I said, and kept asking me questions and interrupting me while I was speaking to the person who was actually the IT manager. And she just Googled every damn point that she was like, Jesus Christ, you don't have a brain to just tell me what you think at the end of this meeting rather than just Googling and interrupting me. It was the most offensive thing. I didn't so that was when I text you and I was like, Sean, we're doing this imposter syndrome thing. I right now don't feel comfortable in my own skin with somebody next to me Googling every word I'm saying.
But she was trying to be relevant.
I don't know.
That's all that was, because, otherwise I would sit there and go, I don't know what this is. Explain it to me. Because if I'm going to work with you on a build out, I need to know if I can communicate with you.
Oh, yeah.
So
that is the most important thing.
Yeah. And then see if you can explain it. And if I have to ask you like 3 times, we're probably not working together. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that's pretty valid. And if you knew that psychologically from her, it doesn't really change your behavior if somebody's being mean and ruining your setup. It's really, it's like a lousy heckler.
I know. Like